This is a true story, and my life has never been the same since that day. What I'm about to tell you is a gay romance, but not just any romance. It's not the typical love story you're used to hearing. I'm Nathan, 35 years old, and I live in Cleveland, Ohio, a big city with a busy life. But nothing could have prepared my heart for what was about to happen. Alex and I, the man who would change everything for me, share a story that many would consider impossible. He's a prisoner, and I'm the free guy, trying to balance my life and my love for him. But what connects us goes beyond any logical explanation, and this is the story I'm going to tell. So stay with me until the end of this video, because the ending is something you won't want to miss. Alex is incarcerated at Elton Federal Correctional Institution, a medium-security prison here in Ohio. With every visit I make, it feels like the wall between us grows higher. But deep down, I know what we have is real. This is the story of how a free man and a prisoner fell in love and fought to keep the flame alive, despite all the obstacles, the barriers the system places in our path, and the adversities of a love that stood the test of everything. We met by chance, on an ordinary night. I was out with some friends at a bar here in Cleveland, and there he was, Alex, with his calm demeanor, yet eyes full of untold stories. When we first met, he didn't say much. He seemed like the type of man who kept things to himself. But there was something in his gaze, something deep and complicated, as if he were carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, yet still had the courage to open up to me. In that moment, I didn't know it, but my life was about to change forever. After a few casual encounters, our gazes began to meet in a way that we couldn't avoid anymore. Each conversation grew deeper, more intimate, until one day, he said something that still echoes in my mind. I'm in a situation that could destroy me, Nathan. But if you're with me, I know I can survive anything. That's how we started. But what seemed like it could be a normal story took a turn neither of us expected. Alex was arrested for something that happened in the past, a mistake that, somehow, followed him. And it was in that moment, when the prison doors slammed shut behind him, that I realized that, even though he was behind bars, my heart would never be free again. I didn't know what to do. The pain of watching him leave for prison felt like a sharp blade. But when he wrote me his first letter, I knew I couldn't leave him behind. It wouldn't be fair. It wouldn't be right. And so, we began what would become a relationship in the shadows, behind bars, and with limited visits. But the visits, those were something I could never have imagined. Every Wednesday, I would prepare myself for what felt like the only time I could be with him. The tension in the air was palpable. When I stepped into that cold, empty space of the prison, the world outside felt so far away. We weren't just two men trapped by circumstances, but two hearts that, for a moment, could touch, could meet, despite everything. Each encounter was filled with desire and pain, pleasure and longing. No matter how much they tried to separate us, we both knew what we felt was real. And then, when the door closed behind me, and he was there, facing me, it was as though the rest of the world disappeared. The noise of the prison, the stares from the other inmates, even the watchful eyes of the officer who never stopped observing our every move, all became secondary. I couldn't think of anything but him. I didn't know how to handle the tension of the moment, the urgency of our desire, but what mattered was that in that small space, there was still a connection that couldn't be broken. Every visit was a risk. A risk I was willing to take, because, no matter how difficult it was, our love was above any obstacle. Even when the violence and racism from other inmates tried to tear us apart, even when the conditions around Alex seemed unbearable, neither of us ever gave up. Every Wednesday, when the clock struck 2 p.m., I would mentally prepare myself for the visit. The journey to the prison felt like an eternity, as if every mile separating me from Alex added weight to my heart. But at the same time, there was something inside me that refused to give up. Each week, that meeting became more vital, more intense. It wasn't just about physical desire, but about the connection we still managed to maintain, against all odds. I knew he felt the same way. The letters we exchanged between visits, the small words of encouragement, the advice to keep our sanity within those walls. All of that is what kept us alive. But we couldn't deny the growing desire between us. Something that, even within the prison walls, bloomed forbidden and intense. When I entered the visitation room, the sound of the heavy iron door slamming behind me felt like a cruel reminder of where we were. The chains of the prison were harsh, but what truly bound me was not the bars or the guards, but the fact that the man I loved was there physically distant from me in a way I couldn't escape. Alex was always waiting for me at the same table, a tense smile on his face, but his eyes filled with longing. Even with the constant vigilance of the guards and the coldness of the environment, there was something in the air that united us. I knew that, despite the limitations and the watchful gaze of the officer, who frequently kept an eye on our interactions, we understood each other in a way that no one else could. It was as if, for a few moments, the world around us disappeared. The first moments of the visit were always filled with small talk, as we tried to catch up on our lives. I wanted to know how he was handling prison, how he felt, if he could find any peace in that place. He would speak softly about the weight of loneliness, the other inmates, and the moments when he would think of me. Sometimes, words weren't enough. The desire, the tension that had been building up during the week, consumed us, and his hands, always discreet, would reach for mine. We couldn't do much, the space was restricted, and, of course, the risk was ever present. But, in one moment when the officer seemed distracted, and the other inmates' gazes were elsewhere, Alex and I touched. It wasn't just a physical touch, it was the energy between us. The need to feel the other, to have something real, something that wasn't a reflection of prison bars. And there, in that simple touch, we communicated. We couldn't kiss, but our eyes, our bodies, spoke more than words could express. It was a mix of love and tension, of pain and desire. Every second there, sitting face to face with him, felt like we were defying the entire world. The system that separated us, the critical stares of the other prisoners, the risk of being caught, all seemed to vanish when we were together. Alex, for his part, couldn't hide his anxiety. He knew that every visit was a test, and it wasn't just the limited time or the prison's conditions that made him nervous. He was fighting against the hostile environment he was in, against the other inmates, against the fear of being attacked, of being seen differently. He would tell me how, every day, he faced men who tried to get close to him, some with clear intentions, others simply looking for his vulnerability. Yet, he stood firm. His mind was on me. He knew that at least once a week, he could taste freedom again. The taste of a love that, no matter how difficult, still existed. But of all the adversities he faced in prison, the worst were the moments of loneliness. The loneliness of being trapped, of having no control over his own body, not knowing when he would see the man he loved again. And the other prisoners weren't easy to deal with. Some tried to intimidate him, some used racism as a form of power, but he never let that break him. Even with the weight of the world on his shoulders, Alex kept fighting. He told me that every visit made him feel stronger, more capable of enduring it all, because, when he walked out of there, when he returned to the relentless reality of prison, he knew that the love we shared kept him standing. I understood that Alex and I weren't limited by what we could express in words. Prison restricted us, limited us, but something both of us always longed for more. And it was in one of those moments, when everything seemed to be against us, that we found a crack. A crack in the system, a crack in the rules, a crack in time. Each visit was limited to 1 hour, and the relentless ticking of the clock marked every second. The officer, always vigilant, paced back and forth, his presence a constant reminder that in a place like that, freedom was an illusion. But there were days, rare and fleeting, when the vigilance seemed to wane, and there, in that cramped space, between cold benches and the watchful eyes of other inmates, we found a small refuge. It was one of those hot summer afternoons, the heavy air in the visitation room, when a rare moment of distraction arose. The officer was on the other side of the room, and the sound of other conversations filled the space. The touch of his hand was the first sign. I looked at Alex, who, though always alert, couldn't hide the desire in his eyes. There was something in his gaze that told me that, in that brief moment, we should make the most of every second. I knew what that meant. It wasn't much. We couldn't do everything we wanted, but in that instant, it was just the two of us, alone in a world where time seemed to run against us. Without words, without warning, we leaned in. Our gazes met, the heat between us intensified, and it felt as if the space around us disappeared. It was quick, like a flash of lightning. The fear of being caught pushed us to be faster, more furtive. Our bodies were nearly pressed together, and there was nothing left but the sensation of being complete. The soft touch of his hand on my face, his fingers caressing my skin as if he wanted to keep that moment forever. It wasn't a kiss, it wasn't a long embrace, but in that touch was everything we needed to say. The desire, the affection, the longing. Alex looked at me one last time before pulling away. His gaze was filled with intensity, and, though we both knew the visit was coming to an end, in that moment, the world outside didn't exist. There was only the connection between us, which, even in the shadows of a prison, remained strong, unwavering. Even as the seconds dragged on, and the risk was there, we knew that, however brief, that moment was everything we needed. The officer returned to watch us, and, instantly, reality set back in. The clock seemed to tick faster now, and with each passing second, the pressure mounted. But what had happened in that minute, though fleeting, was enough to keep us alive, to remind us that, even separated by bars, what we shared was stronger than any prison. What I didn't know, that afternoon, was that that fleeting moment of intimacy would leave marks on me that lasted far beyond the visit. Though it was only a minute, the weight of each touch, of each exchanged glance, stayed with me long after I left the prison. Each Wednesday, as I approached the security gate, my heart would race. The anticipation, the adrenaline of not knowing what time would hold for us, was always present. And yet, I never regretted a second we spent together. No matter the risk. No matter what others thought. What mattered was that, once again, we managed to find each other. Alex was changing. Prison was leaving its marks on him, but he never allowed it to break him. His once calm demeanor now carried tension, a silent pain he tried to hide. He didn't speak much about it, but I could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the anguish of being locked away, not knowing how long it would be until he could leave and be by my side, fully. The longing he felt became visible in every word, every gesture. But he remained strong. He told me that the only thing that kept him going was the certainty that our love still existed, that each visit kept us together. Sometimes, he would tell me stories of how other prisoners challenged him, how he had to fight against hostility and prejudice, not only for being gay, but for being a strong man, with an unyielding will. Other inmates, those who tried to manipulate or dominate him in some way, didn't make life easy for him. But he never let anything break him. When he spoke of all of this, I felt a mix of pride and concern. I knew he was stronger than he realized. The fear of losing him to the system was always something that lingered in my thoughts. And still, he never stopped reaching out to me in the hardest moments. When the silence of the prison was deafening, I was the one he sought in his letters. When the violence and hatred of the other inmates seemed too much to bear, he clung to the idea of our next visit, knowing that, even for a few minutes, I would be his refuge. Time dragged on, the days, the weeks, the months, everything passed in a way that felt like a crooked line, hard to follow, but I kept going. Alex and I stayed strong, even though we were separated, even though each visit carried the weight of an impending farewell. There were moments when the longing became almost unbearable, when the letters became our only means of communication. But even in those written words, there was a flame that never extinguished. The other inmates, with their taunts and stares, continued to surround him, but he never gave in. I knew he was fighting every day, and I, too, was fighting. The challenges were immense. The world outside wasn't making it any easier, but deep inside me, the certainty that our love would endure kept me moving forward. I remember one particularly difficult day. The tension hung in the air, the atmosphere inside the prison was thick, and I was worried about Alex's safety. With each visit, each moment we spent together, every second we shared, I knew it could be the last time. The risk of him being transferred to another prison, the risk of someone discovering what was happening between us. All of that weighed on us. But the need to live that love was stronger than any fear. One Wednesday, things were more tense than ever. As I entered the prison, the air felt heavier, more suffocating. The warden was, as always, watching us closely, and the other inmates' suspicious looks seemed to anticipate something about to happen. When Alex saw me, he smiled, but there was something different in his expression. Something heavier in his eyes. I knew he was ready for whatever it took to keep us going, to preserve what we had built. It was during that visit that Alex told me something I never thought I'd hear. He looked at me with an intensity that almost broke my heart and, in a low voice, told me that he was finally receiving the news that he would be released soon. The weight of that news made me pause for a moment. I looked at him, unsure of how to respond, unsure of what to say. I was happy, of course, but there was so much fear mixed in. So much fear about what it would mean to live with him outside the prison, what awaited us after all the time spent apart. But there was also a part of me that knew, despite everything, we had overcome the impossible. That prison no longer had the power to hold us. The love we shared, no matter how high the walls around us were, could never be contained. Nothing could tear us apart. The rest of the visit was silent, but the words we exchanged were etched in our hearts. As the time for parting approached, the reality of separation felt more powerful than ever. I looked at Alex, and just before the warden intervened, he pulled me into a quick embrace. I could feel his body pressed against mine, his muscles tense, the warmth of him enveloping me. But the touch was not just physical. It was a touch filled with everything we had lived through, everything we had been, and everything we would still be. As if each caress, each glance, was a silent promise that we would survive, that the future was something we could build together. The door opened, the sound of the metal gates closing behind me, and I left the prison. But, contrary to what I had imagined, I didn't feel the weight of loss. I felt the lightness of hope, the certainty that Alex's freedom would also be our freedom, that we would live a life together, far from the prison, far from the limitations that separated us. A few more weeks passed in wait, and then, finally, the day arrived. I was nervous, my heart racing, and I could barely contain the emotion. When Alex appeared, our eyes met, and everything made sense. The hug that enveloped us was long, desperate, as if the whole world had vanished for a moment. His hands, now free, touched me with a softness I never thought possible after everything we had been through. He was free, but more importantly, we were both finally free. Now, out here, the world was watching us, but we knew that what we had built, what had survived inside those walls, nothing could destroy. The prison was just a chapter, but our love was something eternal. And despite everything, despite all the struggles we had faced, what mattered now was that we were free. Free to live our story, to explore the future together, to finally leave behind the prison where everything once seemed impossible. And that's how Alex and I began the next chapter of our lives. And I know that even though the path was not easy, even though we faced things no one should have to face, what mattered is that, in the end, we kept the promise we made to each other, that, no matter how much the prison tried to tear us apart, the love we felt for each other would be the thing that set us free.